Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we talk about all things USC football and then other stuff too. We have the usual crew. I'm not going to spend much time introducing us because if you watch this show, and I think the same people watch it every week, you already know who we are. Eric McKinney, editor-in-chief of WeAreSC, Mark Holken, WeAreSC staff writer, also podcaster extraordinaire. I'm your substitute host, Chris Arledge. For all of you who wonder how Greg Katz is doing, we've spoken to him. He's doing pretty well. He watches the show. He's following what's going on. And he actually gave me a spring practice review from his perspective, which I forgot to read until after we signed off last time. So probably nobody saw it. But Greg's doing well, and he's recovering. And so that should make you feel good. Okay. Let's see if the rest of this makes us feel good. You guys ready to jump into this? Let's start with the latest transfer portal and news. Today is the last day for people to jump into the portal. I think the last day for people to jump in who aren't, who haven't already graduated. I think those guys can do it maybe until tomorrow. Doesn't mean they have to sign with the school today or tomorrow. They can sign with the school whenever they want, but they have to jump in. So, guys, what's going on in the portal? Are we getting what we need? Are we worried that we're not going to get what we need? Is it time to panic? Should we run around with our hands up in the air screaming? What's going on? Eric, help us out.
It has not been the slam dunk, home run, whatever other sports term you want to use for USC in the portal this spring. There's a cut, right? They needed a couple pieces, and they've gotten some of those peripheral pieces, a couple wide receivers. If you want to get better in the kicking game, you did that. They need big guys. They need big guys. You talked all offseason about all the rosters getting bigger, they're looking bigger, but Lincoln Riley, really the two spots that he talked about, specifically saying we need to get guys, they said they would be active with offensive linemen, and they said probably interior defensive line. And so far, there's no, again, there's not a ticking clock on you have to land them right now. You've got some time, and some of these guys are taking a little while. But the idea that there's this guy and what do we have to say, back channeled, is that what's proper to use now, that it was ready to go and jump in, that didn't happen, hasn't happened. Now I will say, if I was a big name guy, and I'm not saying that this is absolutely going to happen, if I was a big name guy, the way I would handle this is 20 seconds before the portal closed, I would go into my compliance or wherever you had to go, put my name in, don't talk to anybody, and then head out. So with that option still there, you've got a little bit more time for people to jump in. But no, at this point, you got to say that so far, you haven't really made a big statement and done a lot to help your team where you most needed it at this point. The timing is always interesting, right? You can't dictate when guys commit and when guys jump in the portal. So if you add guys who look maybe like luxuries early on, but you finish with everything you need, then that's a different discussion. But right now, yeah, I can understand some of the fans feeling of, hey, it's more wide receivers that are coming in, but we haven't gotten the big defensive lineman, offensive lineman, and it hurts when you lose an Isaiah Rakes. And if he was going to be an impact guy, if he was going to play a little bit, it's just the body up there, and you've lost now, I think three or four defensive linemen in this kind of transfer portal cycle. So yeah, it's starting to heat up, I think, a little bit in terms of what you needed to do and what you haven't done yet.
Mark, what do you think?
So I come from a background of sales, and the first thing they teach you in sales is don't set an expectation that you can't meet. And I think that's what's going on right now is, during the offseason, Lincoln Riley talked about expectations and, things that they need to do. Eric talked about filling specific needs. Well, I don't know if everybody feels like another scholarship kicker is a priority need right now, when you, like Eric mentioned, you need interior help on the defensive line, you need some depth help on the offensive tackle, and that's what's got everybody's angst up. Yes, they filled needs at wide receiver. They needed numbers. They filled a couple. They needed another defensive back. They got that. Well, for every 100 guy, for every one guy that's leaving USC, Coach Riley said there's going to be 100 guys lining up. He set an expectation level, and as you know, Eric opened the show with, we're not there. He's not touching that expectation level. And I think that's why people are a little heated right now. Now, again, still lots of time. I don't know if those guys are going to wait until, you know, there's 20 seconds left. I think USC knows who their pool of candidates are. Does USC want to, you know, swim deep into that ocean, I guess, is what's going on. It seems like, you know, if they're going to wait around, they're probably not going to end up with the guys they need. They're getting outbid. At least that's the impression I'm getting.
Yeah, you know, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what's going on in terms of NIL money and the extent to which that's the problem. You know, one potential issue, and I don't know if this is going on, but if you really believe that there are going to be 100 guys lining up for every one guy you leave, then you think you can be extraordinarily picky. And I don't know if there are 100 defensive tackles lining up. If there are 100 of them, I haven't seen them. And the few guys that there are, you know, I think a lot of us thought that the TCU guy was somebody that Williams is somebody they'd go after. I don't know if they have. I've heard rumors that he's asking for too much in compensation, or maybe it's not the type of player he's looking for. My own impression, I know Williams has been productive at TCU. I think he looks slow. He looks like a space eater, but you know, a space eater wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for USC right now. Having a guy inside that you can't move, that's not a terrible thing. The guy from Michigan State, I mean, there are two from Michigan State, but one who visited USC and is also looking at Colorado, and there are rumors about Colorado offering him a lot of money. And you look at that and say, if USC is losing out on defensive tackles to Colorado because they're not able or willing to compete in terms of dollars with the Buffaloes, that's a bad sign. Now we'll see what happens. I'll say this: I don't know that when fans complain, oh, it's a kicker, but he can't play defensive tackle. It's wide receiver. Can he play defensive tackle? I don't know that there are opportunity costs to picking up those other guys, right? It's not like they're not going to have space on the roster for a defensive tackle, or it's not like the coaches were so busy recruiting that kicker that they weren't able to contact defensive tackles for the last week. So that doesn't make it. These are two completely separate things. There's nothing wrong with landing a guy at another position that can help you when that doesn't detract from your ability to still go after defensive tackles. So looking at those two things as, oh, great, we're spending all our time getting kickers and wide receivers. No, they're not. That's not what's going on. That being said, while I think picking up a couple wideouts is useful, while I think getting a nickel is probably more than useful, I would have felt pretty comfortable going into next season with Josiah Zamora as the number 7 wide receiver on the roster. If you have 2 defensive tackles and an offensive tackle who I think can play at a high level that are added to the roster, right? I mean, I get why you're adding wide receivers. It's a small group numbers wise, even though it's a large group in terms of talent level. But they could have made do with those 7 wideouts. They could have, especially if you're expecting more out of your tight ends, so you don't have to be, 4 wide all the time. So we'll see. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me to despair when the guys USC apparently is interested in still haven't committed anywhere. They may land those guys, and if they land those guys, then all of this hand-wringing amounts to very little. But if they don't land any of those guys, then you have a problem on the roster, right? You just do. USC can win 8 or 9 games with this defensive line if the offense plays really well, the secondary plays well, they scheme better defensively. They can do that. But it's hard to imagine being better than that against this schedule with the defensive front they have. So we'll see. I don't know how soon it will be, but usually the transfer portal moves pretty quickly. But there have been some defensive tackles that have been in that transfer portal now for a couple of weeks. And they still haven't committed anywhere. So I don't know. We'll see. Any other thoughts on the transfer portal, Mark?
I mean, look, you brought in Eric Henderson. He was supposed to be the magnet, right? And so you've got Los Angeles, you've got Eric Henderson, you've got Lincoln Riley, and you supposedly you got a pretty nice NIL package that you can offer to. We're talking about Derek Harmon. All of a sudden, Derek Harmon leaves campus. He takes the visit. He's going to Colorado, and now he's weighing, well, do I want to be coached up by Coach Prime and Warren Sapp and whatever Colorado can offer? Why is USC even battling for this? That's the issue right now. If you have to kind of narrow things down, you're thinking, all things considered, it's got to be about money. And USC isn't willing to step up.
Yeah, look, here's the thing, too. You see it in the NFL all the time where there's certain positions that teams have to overpay for because they don't have a choice. Teams overpay for quarterbacks. Right now the Cowboys are trying to figure out whether they want to give Dak Prescott $40 or $45 million a year. Is he worth that? No. But you could do a lot worse at quarterback than Dak Prescott. And if you're not good there, then you're not good. And so that makes it a tough decision. At USC, I don't think having quality quarterback play is going to be an issue. But defensive tackle may be the spot where USC just has to overpay. Because that's a position that is much more difficult for USC to land. There aren't a lot of homegrown stud defensive tackles. And it's hard to be a great defense if you don't have a couple of those guys. So it may be that they don't want to overpay. It may be that they don't have a choice if they want to have the kind of football team they need. So we'll see. Any final thoughts, Eric?
No, I think we kind of said it all, right? That's USC says, I want to go get a defensive tackle. Guess what? Get in line. Every single school out there says we want to go get a defensive tackle. There's five. There's not a ton to spread all the way around. And I think it's right. It's a combination of development, who have you produced, and how much you're going to pay for them. Yeah.
Well, if it's down to USC and Colorado, I'm not sure that development is the primary consideration, right? Now I could be wrong. Look, Warren Sapp and Deion Sanders have their own appeal, right? These are big name dudes who have done some things, but at the same time, this is not a kid who's trying to choose between Georgia and Ohio State and USC. Where you'd say, okay, I can understand why you might think those other places are just as good at developing you as a top prospect. And if you're, if you're a guy that has a year or two left, and your primary goal should not be to make an extra $100,000 this year, that's just stupid. And I understand if you're a young person, you look at that and say, yeah, but it's $100,000. That's fine. But it's far more important to be in the top half of the first round of the NFL draft than it is to make an extra $100,000. Now, maybe you don't think that you need Coach Henderson to get you there, and that's fine. But that should be your focus. It makes absolutely no sense. Not for a guy who can be a first-day NFL pick. For most college students, for most guys who are going to be third, fourth, fifth round picks in the NFL draft or free agents, absolutely. Go make sure you get your extra $100,000. But if you're a guy at one of these premier positions, left tackle, defensive tackle, quarterback, wide receiver, where you're talking about the difference between huge money and far less huge money, getting an extra $100,000 this year is not the thing you should be focused on. But
recruits have made dumber decisions than that in the past. It's
no
right.
Question.
There's how connected are you to Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter? Those are big name guys. USC doesn't have Caleb Williams kind of out there anymore as the face. Again, I'm not saying for this particular guy that matters. I'm not saying that should matter to anybody, but those are all things that are out there too as potential pushes or draws or whatever to one way or another.
Look, young men are not known for great judgment overall. And yes, recruits have made dumber decisions. I'm pretty sure UCLA will field a full roster this year. That means a whole bunch of guys made bad decisions. There are guys every year that get full ride scholarship offers from Stanford and choose to go to Arizona State. This happens. Shouldn't happen, but it happens. All right. I guess we're done with that. We'll see what happens over the coming week. I've got to think that some of these big name defensive tackles are going to make a decision by the time we're back here next week. So we'll either be celebrating or we will be screaming and yelling.
Well, did you see that article from Pete Nakos from On3? I mean, the market price is 500K to 800,000. If you're a mid guy playing interior defensive line, imagine what somebody who is actually worth their weight in gold, $1.5 million, 2 million for 1 year.
I wonder. I mean, I'm curious what the conversation was that I think Bear Alexander had with USC relatively recently, because he's better than a mid guy, and he has the potential to be an elite guy. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But look, the market price is what the market price is, and if you want to be an elite organization, you have to have elite talent. That means you have to pay the market price for people. And if you're unwilling or unable to do it, then you're simply not going to be able to compete. That's the reality. And if that means that Ohio State and Oregon end up getting all the elite prospects that USC wants, then USC is playing for 4th or 5th in the Big Ten every year. So we'll see. Okay. Other than getting a defensive tackle or two, topic number 2, what should be the primary goal of the USC football program between now and fall camp? What do we want to see these guys accomplish between now and August? Mark, what do you think?
Continue on their workout and eating plan. Just continue to get bigger, continue to get stronger, get faster. Look, you talked about it. Fill in the holes on the roster where you need to be filled. Get ready for fall camp. Get ready for PRPs. Someone sent me this message. I wasn't keeping my calendar checked off, but May 25th, we're 99 days away from kicking off against LSU. That's how far away we are. It's that close. So USC needs to kind of ramp things up now. You saw some good things that they did during the offseason. You saw some good things during the spring. Now they need to take all that and make sure it's ready for September 1 or whenever they open fall camp. That's priority number 1. Nothing else. Football, eat, sleep. Football, eat, sleep. Wash, rinse, repeat. I don't want to hear.
Should they go to class sometimes too, you think?
Well, if they have one class during the summer, squeeze it in. Other than that, no.
All right.
Focus on football, football, football. It's a big year coming up. And look, we're concerned about how things are going with, well, sort of concerned with recruiting, more concerned with the transfer portal. It is going to be essential that USC that people aren't looking at USC as using this as a throwaway season, getting ready for 2025.
Yeah. Eric, I'm focused on football and I'm eating. So am I doing what these SC, I mean, should they be following my example, all these guys?
I think that's fine. I don't know how you sleep at the same time as the other two, but if you could work that out, that'd be helpful.
I'm a terrible sleeper. They shouldn't follow my example there.
So it's 2 things for me, and sure, football in general, yes, but specifically over the summer, I think it's getting Alani Noah and Mason Murphy, right? If Mason Murphy's going to be your guy, and Lincoln Riley, didn't come out and specifically say, yeah, he's our starter game 1, but they seemed pleased with his development over the spring. So if Alani Noah and Mason Murphy are your right side, those 2 guys spending a ton of time together during PRPs and getting that side to where they're confident together and playing together and understand kind of pulls and spacing and all of that stuff there, I think is key for the offense. And then defensively, Dan Lynn talked about we're not gonna put everything in during spring. So you still have a bunch of install to go. He had talked earlier about how vital it is to find spring leaders because they do so much during the summer. And I think it's that front 6 kind of run fits. And again, how do they play off each other and how do they all work together? Because we've seen over the past couple of years, just 6 guys doing 6 completely different things. It felt like play to play. So finding that kind of continuity and togetherness up front, again, no surprise talking about right up on the ball on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think you can do, again, quite a bit there in terms of playing together and spending time together and all that during PRPs. Just kind of how do you fit? What does this guy do naturally well? And how do I play off that? I think those again, I know defensively, it's a ton of guys, but that group up front and then offensively, that right side, what do they look like? What do those two things look like when they start fall camp?
Yeah. Yeah, all that makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, the other side of this is, in addition to preparing your current players, you're about to go into what is these days the most important recruiting time of the year, right? I mean, that wasn't that case when you just had the February signing date, but it's that case now. This is where Lincoln Riley brings a bunch of people over to his house, and they all look at the ocean and talk to Ronnie Lott and see what happens. And what the truth is, the problem USC has right now, and we'll probably allude to this in a few minutes, but the problem they have right now is that recruiting classes 3-4 years ago were not filled with enough good football players. And you don't want to be in the position 3 years from now where you're desperate in the transfer portal, trying to throw money at the 3 guys that you think could make you better while everyone else is also throwing money at those guys. You don't want to be there 3 years from now. And that means that you have to have a front 7 recruiting class this year that's elite. And a lot of that work is going to be done in the coming 2 months, seems to me. So that will be interesting as well. It used to be we didn't have much to talk about recruiting wise in the summer. It wasn't a big deal. Now all those big recruiting weekends are taking place in June, where you have just a huge number of big time recruits. So we'll see. And obviously, look, Benny Wiley and his staff have managed to put weight on these guys. Once USC's coaching staff decided it's better to be a big football player than a small football player, all of a sudden the players started to get better. But there's also a fair amount of self-discipline and self-motivation that has to go into this offseason. And if you're Eric Gentry and you want to become an elite linebacker and an NFL prospect, and you can't walk into fall camp at 213, right? And that's going to require a lot of effort and maybe more. I mean, maybe this guy just burns calories like nobody's business. But if you're Bear Alexander and you want to take that next step, then you're going to have to be out working your butt off in the weight room and on the field when it's hot and it's not much fun. We'll see whether these guys are willing to do that. That's always a question. That's always a question with any sort of athlete, right? I mean, you see guys at the biggest stage that there's just a difference in work ethic. Kobe Bryant became a legend in part because his work ethic was just so much better than almost everybody else's. They'd write articles about it, and people would say, that's crazy that he does that. Well, the guys that work that way become better, and we'll see whether USC's culture is such that guys feel compelled to work that way, even the ones who don't want to. Because I'll give you a hint. If you have 80 guys on your football roster, you don't have 80 guys that are self-motivated to get out and work extraordinarily hard every day. You don't. That's why culture is so important, because those guys have to be pushed. So we'll see. It'll be very interesting. I imagine we're going to have a whole lot of good recruiting news over the next few months. We probably won't have any news on these other issues. We're not going to know until we're sitting in the stands in Las Vegas. Okay, I got a tough question for you guys, and this is going to make a lot of people mad. Here's the question first, and then I'm going to give a little bit of explanation. I want you to give me the Mount Rushmore of college football blue blood programs. Now, that means you're limited to 4. Don't give me 5, don't give me 6. And the reason that I want 4, the reason I worded the question this way, is because getting to 4 is extremely difficult. I think the top 7 are easy. OU, USC, Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Texas. There's your top 7. Maybe Nebraska and Miami after that at 8 or 9. But at one time, Nebraska would have been in the top. It's been 30 years since they've been anything. They probably never will be again. So they're gone, right? There's your top 7. I could even whittle that down to a top 5 and feel okay about it. But once you go to a top 4, you're cutting somebody who doesn't deserve to be cut. All right? So, Mark, I want you to start us off. I want you to give us the Mount Rushmore of college football blue bloods.
Yeah, Chris, you set it up perfectly, because those first 3, at least for me, easy. But when you get to number 4, you're like, all right, somebody's going to be feeling the pain here. So my first three, easy: USC, Notre Dame, Alabama. Number 4, I had to choose between Oklahoma, Michigan, and Ohio State.
Yep.
Look, we're all results oriented, right? Each one of those programs can say, look at my resume. However, I think what Oklahoma has done, when you take into consideration where they're located, not a lot of talent in Oklahoma. You got to go get it out of Texas, which is a next door neighbor. But you've been able to be consistent throughout your history and stay with the guys like USC and Notre Dame and Alabama. I think you probably can etch your face in that stone. You deserve to be up there.
So Ohio State and Michigan are gone. You're throwing them off the island. Yeah.
Man, it's hard. It's a tough one.
Okay.
I've never been all about conference love anyway. So for me, it's all about what you've done on your own.
Yeah. Okay. Eric, what are your 4?
I'm surprised that Mark didn't squeeze Boise State and Purdue in that top 4 there. So here, I was right when you listed off, when you said it's an easy 7 and started listing them off. I had a little bit of a panic of like, oh my God, he's going to pick 7 completely different teams that I had. My 4 come from your 7. If we're being really, really honest about this, every single non-USC fan, I don't think would have USC in their top 4. It has been a long, long time. USC goes a long, long time of stretches where they are not super relevant. Even now, we're right 20 years since it's been like every single year USC's been in that discussion. I have USC in the top 4. Notre Dame, Alabama, USC as my, not in that order, but as the 3. My 4th one, I threw Oklahoma out fairly easily. Mine was Michigan, Ohio State as that 4. I went Michigan, and a large part because they just won that title now, that again, that it kicks your relevancy back in. I know it hasn't been that long since Ohio State won one and has been competitive all the time. The overall wins, the only program with 1,000 wins and a pretty big gap between 1 and 2 for them. And I think just the consistency of kind of 10-win seasons and being involved all the time. I also think that there's, whenever Mark answers it all the time. Whenever there's a uniform question, he throws out the helmet. I think that kind of just the recognition and the fact that if you cut a program, if all of a sudden it disappeared, what would make the most noise? What would make, have people take the most notice? That's why I've got Michigan in there at 4.
Well, you kind of use your own argument against yourself a little, Eric. You talk about
I didn't.
You talk about USC's gap. You talk about USC's gap of being relevant. Michigan's had some pretty big gaps of being not relevant. I mean, how long did it take them to win a national championship since their last one?
They're hit, and they claim a lot of weird ones, but yeah, the argument against them would just be the number, just the sheer number of national titles. Yeah, and sure, but you gotta get to 4 somehow, and so I used what I wanted to use.
I thought we were being consistent.
So, this is an interesting one to me because I think it depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for programs that have been at the top consistently for a very, very long time? Because that obviously has to be part of it. Or are you looking for programs that have been truly elite many times in the past, right? You could never have, like Florida State could never make an argument here because Florida State had an incredible run with one coach, and then they had 2 good seasons with another, and that's it in their history, right? You have to have multiple runs at the very least. I threw out Nebraska out of the top 7 because Nebraska has been lousy for 30 years. But I have Notre Dame in my top 4, despite the fact that Notre Dame hasn't won a national title since 1988. And if you look just at the last 40 years, Notre Dame is behind every single one of those teams that we talked about in the top 7. I think maybe not Texas. Texas has had a lot of struggles, but But I still have Notre Dame in my top four. And the reason I have Notre Dame in my top four is because when you think of college football as a casual sports fan, you think of Notre Dame. They have the most colorful tradition, the most well-known fight song. They are college football. And as a and I know USC fans are mad at me right now for saying that, but it's true. And if you've gone to games in South Bend, and I've gone many times, you realize that nobody does tradition better than Notre Dame. But Notre Dame is at risk right now of falling out of that top four because it's been so long since they've been good. But they're still there. Alabama has to be there. If you talk about the most successful college football coaches of all time, probably the two guys at the top of the list are both Alabama coaches, which tells you all you need to know about that. I have USC in my top four. USC has not been as consistent as Michigan. Michigan's had some down years, but Michigan, you just pick a moment in time and you look at the top 10, you're probably going to find Michigan there. With USC, that's been a lot more spotty. But when USC has been good, they've been better than Michigan when they've been good. Michigan just won a national title. Fine, I get that. I'm not saying Michigan's never elite. I'm just saying Michigan's had a lot of seasons where Michigan is about the 8th or 9th best team in the country. But when USC has been elite, they have been a top 2 program in the country. And they've done that a number of different times. Michigan doesn't have the national titles that USC has. They don't have the Heisman's USC has. And I don't think they have the ceiling USC has. I don't think Michigan has the ceiling that Ohio State has, frankly. I know they hate hearing that. Ohio State has won more big titles than Michigan has. It just has. So I think Michigan is one of the ones I'm going to drop here because I don't think winning a lot of games when you're counting games that were played 100 years ago matters nearly as much as what have you done over the last 50 years in terms of winning titles. And when it comes to Michigan, that is not much. They've won a couple. Nothing wrong with that. They're still great. But that's not nearly as many as the other teams on this list have won over that time period. So I'm dropping them. I think Oklahoma has to be included. Oklahoma is, you look at national titles, you look at the teams that have dominated over multiple periods. You have the longest all-time winning streak. You have a ton of Heisman winners. I just don't see how you don't include Oklahoma. So I have to have them in there. But the problem is I have a very difficult time choosing between OU and Ohio State. I find that extremely difficult. I can get rid of Texas easily. I can drop Michigan, although it's hard. But as between Oklahoma and Ohio State, the only reason I'm going to choose Ohio State is because I hate OU fans more. Ohio State fans aren't great. If you've met any, they're not great. They're not people you want to invite over to the house. They're difficult. I had some horrible lady in the horseshoe just screaming at my face every time Ohio State got a first down in 2009. And I think she was the nicest person they had there. But still, OU fans are far worse. So I'm going to go with USC, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Ohio State, although OU fans have a legitimate gripe. Any further thoughts on this? Any other programs we want to get angry before we move on?
You don't have Oregon's 9, right? In your 8, and then
Oregon is
big. Talked about their the colorful tradition. They don't have it the most.
Who's that?
Didn't you take a subtle dig at Oregon about their colorful tradition, or when you're comparing Notre Dame and?
No, we were talking about the Mount Rushmore of college football programs. I wasn't talking about or thinking about Oregon. Why would I be? Oregon is, if you talk about the West Coast, Oregon is in the top 9 all time. But it's close, I think, right? Because Cal, Stanford, USC, UCLA, Washington, easily have better traditions than Oregon. So Oregon is 6 at best. But I think you can make an argument for San Diego State or Oregon State or Washington State or San Jose State over Oregon all time. Okay, that's enough talk about Oregon.
What about, you can go back to like what those schools USC played, like the Pomona School for Boys, or like you see those pop up on the schedule 150 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I played against Pomona in 1991 as a freshman at Occidental, and we beat Pomona. So I have very little respect for them now. Any team that I've had a hand in beating, and I didn't have much of a hand. I think I played special teams and a couple plays on defense. This was my first game as a freshman. But any team that I've had a hand in playing, I don't respect. So you're right. We shouldn't include Pomona. Good call. Go ahead, Mark. You to say something?
Oh, I'm just laughing at the idle chit chat.
Okay. All right, let's talk about NIL then. There was a big event last night. House of Victory had about 50 former USC players, a lot of them big names, some of them the biggest of names, right? Ronnie Lott gave a big speech firing up the donors. If you don't open up your wallet when Ronnie tells you to, I don't know what's wrong with you. I mean, I wouldn't, but I'm cheap. But they had a big event, and so that sounds great. The downside to that is, as we mentioned earlier, we have a defensive tackle that USC badly needs and badly wants, who's trying to choose between USC and Colorado, which means they're trying to choose between USC and a second-rate program in a second-rate conference, coached by a guy who plays for Clicks, according to at least one of his former players. And it has a program that is about as unstable as you can get. I'm sure he's going to land a bunch of guys in the transfer portal like he did last year. He just he reinvents his roster to the tune of like 50 new guys every year, apparently, which isn't, I don't think, the way to win football games in college, but who am I to argue with Coach Prime? So what do we make of this, guys? I mean, we don't know much about NIL. We get some information, but it's limited. We get some rumors, and then you just look and see what happens. Certainly looks like there are other programs that are in a stronger position than USC is, but I don't know. So, Eric, why don't you start us off? I mean, NIL seems to be extraordinarily important. It's certainly a big topic of interest with college football fans. Where are we right now? How do we feel about it?
So it doesn't seem to be a important topic. It is the important topic. It is the only thing that truly matters in terms of building a roster, keeping it together, and being competitive. Yes, you need to develop players and you need to recruit and all of that stuff. You need to have as strong of an NIL program as possible. And honestly, for USC, it took a long time for them to figure out the path on it and to convince USC's moneyed people this is the way it has to go now. USC's donors had donated in a specific way to a specific thing for a long time. It was an uphill slog to get them to figure out we're doing this. And let's not forget, USC launched a gigantic facilities restructuring, rebuilding, reimagining. Carol Folk called it the athletics moonshot at this same time. Now, everybody wants to keep up on their facilities, but few of these big NIL programs are building from scratch, where a lot of this money is going now for USC. So that being said, it's been a big uphill climb. There are programs clearly around the country that are far more well-established, have far more resources coming in for their NIL. Where USC is now feels like forever away from where they were a few years ago. We're going to find out. And the problem is, as USC catches up to, okay, where we think we need to be, there's a chance that they're going to find out that's where you needed to be 2 years ago. So I think there will ultimately, right, programs are not going to pay good defensive tackles $4 million, $5 million a year. It's not going to keep going up like that. But I think USC is a little bit conservative in terms of, we don't want to just throw every single thing we have at this guy because we have to have them. What I think people should probably keep in mind is that USC seems to be, and their coaches specifically, very sort of picky at this point, not in terms of is this guy good or not, but we saw a transfer portal haul coming in for the 2022 class that meshed unbelievably well and worked together and really helped that locker room. We saw a class in 2023. Again, I'm not saying, locker room cancers or problems or whatever, but it did not work. It did not work. The guys who came in didn't play or produce as much as you thought you did. So it feels like there's a bit of hey, we need to do this, but we need to make sure we're getting right guys. There are players where when they initially go in, you think, yeah, obviously, that's obviously a guy USC has to go get. And it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I don't know, while fans want to say right away, oh, they're not paying that guy enough, they're not doing enough. I think some of these guys, hey, we took a look and we asked around and we saw him and it's not going to fit. They're not going to fit. And I think there is a sense of, we need to be careful about some of these guys. Now, if USC does trip them in and keeps recruiting them after, right, they meet the program, you kind of get, like Riley's talked about, needing sort of sign off from some of the leaders. Yeah, this is a guy that will fit in here. If they keep chasing that guy and he goes somewhere else, then yes, that's an issue. If there's a guy you target at a position of need, you sort of vet him, everything checks out, he comes in, the roster says yes, and then you don't get him. Those are the guys where you start to say, okay, now what's the problem? And I think the Michigan State defensive tackle, right, being kind of at the top of that list, that's a guy where you have targeted him and you need to go get him. So again, I'm gonna, whatever his decision is, I think tells you kind of the state of where USC is right now, in terms of, can you go get the guy that you need? Can you go get the guy that you target? I don't think everyone is that, right? Demonic Williams from TCU, it never really felt like USC said, that's our guy. We got to go get him. We got to go get him, whatever the price ends up being. So I don't think they're all created equally, but I also don't think right now if USC has an NIL program that puts them up there with some of these other programs, Oregon, Ohio State, just in terms of what they can do and what results they're going to get. So it's still, jury's still out, I think, on it. Lincoln Riley talked about, we love where we are. We've come really far. It's night and day from where it was. And I do believe that, but if you go to the auction and say, I really want that, and you come home with all your money and you didn't get anything, then you didn't go there to do what you wanted to do.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, USC's NIL is still trying to find out or figure out who they are, what they want to do. Are they better off than they were last year and the year before? Sure, but they're still behind. I mean, last night they held it. For me, it seemed like a Jerry Lewis telethon. You had talent up there singing. You had the coaches jumping up there singing, asking for money. So you knew this was happening. You knew you had to have two different NIL payrolls, one for roster retention and another one for high school recruiting. That's where USC is trying to catch up. And they're trying to figure out how do we divide up this money now? Eric alluded to that it's a facilities upgrade. You've got your roster retention. You have the scare with Bear Alexander saying, you know what? I passed the team leaders vetting process. I got mine, but I need a little bit more now. My point is, NIL has changed the game. There is no more vetting players. Do they fit the locker room culture? That's gone. It's a business. You got to find players that you can count on to be there for 1 year, pay them what they're worth, and build your roster year by year. As much as we want them to focus on high school recruiting, they're limited because the guys you bring in through the high school ranks, once they've developed in a year or two, they're hitting the portal because they want to go get paid. It doesn't matter about vetting and creating that locker room culture. It's gone. NIL and the transfer portal have destroyed that. You can get as close as you want to it, but Eric talked about how everything worked out so well in 2022. Didn't work out in 2023 because the longer we get into this transfer portal era, the more we dive into NIL, the players know they are running the show. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this goes forward. I don't like it. I thought I was going to like it. I don't like the direction it's going right now. And USC, you got the money, spend it. And if you can't get it from everybody, I don't know what they're going to do. Because we talked about it earlier in the show. You got a guy you bring on the campus, you folks, right, this is going to fill our need. We're talking about the kid from Michigan State. He left campus. It's like, you know what? I can go get the same amount of money somewhere else, maybe a little bit more. Doesn't matter anymore about that locker room culture if they fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason 2023 didn't work out is because you brought in 3 offensive linemen you expected you could plug in right away and that they played really well, and they didn't. But you know, USC got the guys, including a 4th one they got that from Florida that never showed up on campus. But you know, if those guys had played the way you expected them to play, I think we'd be looking at 2023 a little bit differently. The defense was going to be a mess because once he decided to bring back Alex Grinch, the defense is going to be a mess, right? That was just one of those that was one of those let's change Coca-Cola's formula level mistakes that Lincoln Riley made, and there was no recovering from that. But had the offensive line played well, that would have made a big difference in a lot of those games, right? I mean, Notre Dame plays out much differently if USC can block Notre Dame's front guys, right? I mean, it just does. Because that Notre Dame offense didn't do much. They didn't have to do much, in fairness to them. But and look, I don't know that it's the case that if you bring in elite guys that they're just going to leave. That seems to happen to mid-level programs a lot more than it does to the upper echelon programs. There are guys that leave Alabama. There are guys that leave Georgia. There are guys that leave Ohio State. But you don't have a lot of stars leaving those programs that I've seen, right? I mean, you don't. You have some of that, and they have to pay those guys, and you have to be competitive. But the best programs seem to hold on to their best guys for the most part. You lose a guy here and there. If you're Michigan State or Purdue or Pittsburgh, sorry, coach, and you have a superstar player, yeah, you're probably going to lose that guy. You just are, and there's nothing you can do about that. But I don't think USC has to be worried about losing a ton of the guys in the roster. For the most part, the guys that have left USC in the transfer portal, probably guys that needed to leave. For the most part, right? You've had a couple of exceptions. I don't think they wanted to lose Tackett Curtis, right? That was a blow. That's a guy they invested a lot in. But for the most part, the guys who leave in the transfer portal, it's okay. They probably needed to go. But you have to be able to recruit, and if you can't recruit through the portal because you don't offer money to the guys who jump into the portal, and the guys who jump in the portal usually are looking for money. High school kids want money too, but I think it may be a little more balanced with the high school kids in terms of where you're going to school, how comfortable you feel there, are you going to be developed, that sort of thing, right? And so if you're building your roster from high school kids, it's going to take a while because you're going to have to develop them for 2, 3 years, 4 years. That's what Michigan did last year, and it paid off. But Michigan also had a head coach that, despite the fact that he was a hometown hero with a great resume when he got there, was screamed at for the first 3, 4 years because it was taking him a while to actually build up to the program they wanted to see. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens with this. But when you have guys who are looking for money, I'm not sure that USC is the program that can really compete right now with the major players. And it's even harder. It's one thing losing to Oregon, where you have a billionaire who seems to care more about Oregon athletics than he does anything else in the world, which is fine, right? It's one thing losing to a team like that in the NIL sweepstakes. Another thing losing to a program like Colorado, which you're surprised to hear they even have NIL support. Then you hear that they're outbidding USC for a guy USC really needs. That one's tough to take. But the thing about NIL is, if you want to overpay for one guy, there are a lot of programs that can overpay for one guy, and that sets the market for that guy. So you either overpay or you don't. And if you don't get your guy and you go into a season where you have one elite defensive tackle and then some young guys who you think can be good, but you don't know how soon they're going to be good, you see how that plays out. I think we have some idea how it's going to play out if that's where we are. Any other thoughts on NIL? House of Victory? How were Lincoln Riley's vocals? Did we feel good about that?
Yeah. I mean, I would, he can't quit his day job, but it was those are fun events. I mean, just seeing the old players come back and how they kind of all, you know, exchange pleasantries and some of these guys you just have these. I mean, seeing Cedric, that was the first time I'd seen Cedric Ellis in a while. And you just, you see him and Sean Cody and Frosty Rucker kind of all together, and we're talking about defensive lines and that kind of stuff. You remember kind of what those guys did on the field. But Rodney Peete is great as the MC. He's done it a couple times now. I mean, I don't think anybody's surprised by that. Chris Hale kind of serves as his sidekick a little bit. And then the Olympic sports too were really well represented. You had coaches there. April Ross was there. Caitlin Sandino was there. Lenny Kraselberg was there. It was a fun night. You hope that the push for giving and boosting that NIL is heard and followed through on.
Rodney Peete's one of my all-time favorite Trojans, easily top 5. Love Rodney. Okay, well then next time go to House of Victory. You can hear Rodney Peete tell jokes and Lincoln Riley sing. I can't imagine something better than that. All right, last topic before we get to our game. NFL draft, real quick. USC had 7 players picked in this year's draft. Obviously the number 1 overall pick, which was not a surprise to anybody. What do we make of this draft? Good night or bad night for USC? What do we think, Eric?
It was a medium night for you. I know you love when I don't pick your options. So you can push, right? The number 1 overall pick is huge. Now you're by yourself. You have 6 number 1 overall selections. That is going to carry weight for a long time. It's not like that happens and schools just chalk those up. I mean, USC has produced some unbelievable players. You have to be the right year at the right position. So to stand alone there, I know we're not talking about Heisman's, but same kind of thing, right? To be able to say you're number 1, no ties, that is good marketing material. You can put that out there. The fact that you had 7 is not a bad number. I mean, you can twist it into you had the most of any program that finished unranked, which is not great. But again, when you're talking about pure numbers and when you look at next year, you can say now we've had X number in 2 years and that's a boost. Brendan Rice went way lower than I think a lot of people expected. Taj Washington went lower than a lot of people expected. So there's some stuff in there. Marshawn Lloyd probably better than where he went, but running back is such a difficult thing that you never assume those guys are really going to go where they are in terms of talent. So where the guys went was disappointing, I think, if you're a USC fan, certainly for those guys, although being drafted at all means you're a pretty good football player. But I don't think it was some crushing blow. Had those guys fallen out completely, then it's different. And I know there's not a ton of space from like mid-7th to out of the draft, but I think USC can pretty easily spin that as a solid draft and something to work on going forward. You do see, right, how many recruits have been taken, how many USC signees go compared to the transfer guys come in, and it's just kind of another bullet point for what that roster looked like when Lincoln Riley showed up.
Mark, thoughts on the draft?
Yeah, it's look, you had 7 guys drafted. It's not a bad number. You want to compare it to the 2 teams that participated in the national championship game. Michigan had 13 guys drafted. Washington had 10. USC had 7. That put them, 9th best of all the teams in the draft. So it's not bad, but when you start peeling back the layers, you're saying, all right, USC's been void of some talent. Eric mentioned it just a second ago. 7 guys drafted, 6 of them came through the transfer portal to USC. Now, you want to give USC a little bit of credit for Taj Washington. He was there for 3 years. So you can say, you know what, he's a USC developed player. Outside of Kalen Bullock, Everybody else, they found their way to USC through the transfer portal. That's not a good sign. It's terrible. So USC obviously had enough talent to win 11 games in 2022. The talent didn't drop off that much, where they were only an 8-win team last year. So you got to start pointing, well, you don't want to, but you have to start pointing your fingers at development. Because even the guys that they're bringing through the transfer portal, some of those guys aren't getting drafted. You hope that this was the last draft cycle where USC has low numbers. And you say, all right, well, this is what Lincoln Riley and his staff inherited. But then you say, well, Lincoln Riley might have exacerbated the problem for a little bit longer by keeping his defensive staff for one extra year. So we'll see how that plays out. Brendan Rice lasting until the 7th round, unconscionable. That should not have happened. Kalen Bullock lasting into the 3rd round. All right, maybe. I think that happens because he's a tweener. NFL teams are not sure where they're going to play him. He's going to last in the NFL. But after that, after Caleb Williams, Kalen Bullock, it's kind of a, hey, who do you like? Where do they fit in on your roster? USC, I don't know. They don't have those offensive linemen. They don't have those defensive linemen. That's what's missing from USC's draft.
Yeah. I mean, what's missing from USC's draft is what's been missing from USC's draft classes for some years now, which is upper shelf talent. Obviously, you have Caleb Williams, number 1, but other than that, you don't have any elite guys. Kalen Bullock goes in the 3rd round. I think after Bullock's freshman year, I think you would have said that's a guy who should be higher than a 3rd round choice. But he didn't develop while he was at USC. He didn't. He played better. He played better his next to last year than he did last year. Frankly, he was more promising his first year as a starter than he was his senior year. That's not great. And I do know who I blame for that. When you have one guy that was recruited from high school who gets drafted and the other 6 guys coming through the portal, you both hit on it. And you're right. That tells us something about the state of USC's recruiting over the last 5 years. And it's not good. I mean, Clay Helton and staff completely fell on their faces in many, many respects. But that was one of them, because you should have guys that are 3rd or 4th year players that were recruited by those staffs and that's just not the case. It wasn't a bad night. It's nice to have the number 1 overall pick. It is a little bit disappointing in this sense. I think we had a discussion last year at this time about the last year's draft, and then we all were looking forward to this year. And the numbers we were throwing out there in terms of the number of guys who are going to be drafted, we were all talking about double digits. We were throwing out numbers like 11, 12. To have 7 and to have most of those guys be later than you expected is a letdown. Just is. I think that will change in the coming years, but USC is still behind the elite teams when it comes to talent.
Nobody anticipated Solomon Byrd hearing his name called, and you got a bonus there.
Yeah, no, that's right. And good for him. Solomon Byrd is a success story in so many respects, right? I don't know that anybody was that excited when he came over from Wyoming and thought, okay, who's this guy? He doesn't look like he's all that big, and his numbers at Wyoming weren't all that great. That's a guy who worked hard and became a very solid contributor, and now gets drafted in the NFL. Solomon Byrd is a success story, and I'm happy for him. I hope he sticks. But USC needs more guys called on days 1 and 2. They just do. And you're not an elite program if you're not having a lot of guys called on day 1 and day 2. So they've got their work cut out for them, and we've talked about that already. But get the NIL out, and with the new coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's gonna be much easier to recruit defensive players. I mean, I don't blame. Look, USC's had a problem for years where high school coaches are trying to direct their guys away from USC. Coaches in Southern California trying to direct them away from USC. And if what you're telling them is don't go play defense at USC because Alex Grinch and his predecessors under Clay Helton won't develop you, won't turn you into a high draft choice, seems to me you had a pretty good argument. I don't know that you do anymore. So we'll see what happens. All right, guys. Any more thoughts on this before we play our game? I'm going to take that as a no. All right, it's time to play Arledge's 10 questions. The score is 0-0. We didn't know that. It's not always 0-0 to start the game, but it is today. Question number 1. The return of the prodigal son. Kyle Ford back from UCLA. How do you feel about this? Eric, go.
I'll allow it. So I like the concession that he gave, right? That's what sells me initially or ultimately on being good with him coming back. Just the, hey, that's my fault, right? Like we talked about, why do kids make recruiting decisions? Whatever, right? Dumb decisions, good decisions, whatever it is, that it runs the gamut. So you can understand a young guy feeling, hey, it's not my time here. There's opportunity over there. I'm going to go over there. The ability to kind of step back a little bit, see it, and come back. I can, right? I'm not going to crush him for that. Now, I will say it feels like, and I said this on the site, it feels like you got frustrated in a long line at Disneyland and said, forget this, I'm getting out. Then decided, no, I do want to go on that ride. And now you're back at the line. You're in the back of that same line that you were waiting in, because USC's got some young receivers that are going to play this year. So how he fits it will be interesting to see. But again, his comment of why he came back and all of that is the thing that sort of smoothed it for me.
Mark?
Yeah, best apology ever. I should have used that back in the day with my ex. My bad. I'm tripping. Sorry. Look, I think Kyle Ford coming back, it's a good thing. One, he knows the guys on the team, so there's not going to be any, trying to fit in the locker room. And he fills a specific need, I think, on the field. One, you needed numbers at the wide receiver position. He's not going to pass up Zachariah or Deuce or Jacoby or Mackay, but he can play multiple roles. You can line him up on the outside. I think you can actually line him up inside in the slot, or maybe even offset in a tight end type of role. He's got that type of body. So I think Lincoln Riley dips into his creative playbook. I'm really good with Kyle Ford coming back. Again, he's a good locker room presence too. I think for the most part, his teammates still like him. We understand his frustration why he left. Eric nailed it perfectly. He didn't want to stand in line any longer. He's back in line.
Yeah. So I think I'm with you guys in terms of his tweet that he sent out was very solid PR, and it was funny, and it was self-effacing, and I think it did a lot to sort of alleviate the irritation that I felt, because look, it's not just transferring out. I don't have a problem with transferring out, right? Especially when you have a crowded room and you're not sure you're going to play much. I get that. But transferring to UCLA and gosh, that's a tough one to swallow, man. It's tough. So am I glad he's back? I think glad is too strong, but I'm okay with it. And I do suspect that having him on the roster is better than not having him on the roster. It does give them a big-bodied receiver. It gives them some numbers. Do I want to see him take snaps away from Deuce Robinson or Jacoby Lane? I do not. But I'm okay with it. All right, everybody sort of seems to be in the same place on this, so you'll both get a point. Scores 1-1. Here's an interesting question, especially with the Lakers making an early exit from the playoffs again last night. Southern California sports' biggest underachiever this year, and we'll go ahead and include this basketball season, this past baseball season, obviously the college football season. A lot of candidates. Who do we think? Mark Culkin, who's the biggest underachiever?
Yeah, it's USC, but it's USC men's basketball. I could have gone football. I'm going USC men's basketball. That roster was built to have, to go deep, to win a conference championship, get into the tournament. But just like everything that LeBron touches, it turns to crap at the end. And I could say the Lakers, but I'm just going to say USC men's basketball.
Okay, one vote for USC men's basketball. That's not a bad vote. Eric, where are you?
I mean, LeBron's won a couple championships, but so I'm
Oh,
gonna say,
one in the COVID year.
look, the basketball answer is probably good, but to not side with Mark, that football season was just an absolute lead balloon. I mean, from going, you knew that the defense needed to get better, and the conversation all offseason was, how could it get worse? How could it get worse than what it was in 2022, right? There's no way. There's no way that it could get worse. And we all kind of convinced ourselves there's no way. There's no way, unless they play with 8 guys every snap, it can't get worse. And so to watch it week after week, it's getting worse. Is it really getting it's getting worse? And then it just worse and worse. And you had that 6-game run up, and you knew, okay, now the calendar changes and now it's the back half of the season. And just to have it deflate the way it did. And I mean, you can talk about, was it the offensive line or was it the defense as a whole? It's both sides that really you thought coming in. And again, we talked about the transfer portal class. Hey, these guys are all veterans. They're all going to play. They're all going to be at least, mostly competent and give you snaps and some production. And for it to play out the way it did was, again, I don't know if we were talking about, they're going to win a national championship. I mean, we weren't talking about they're going to struggle in every single game in 2023. So that's my football pitch.
Yeah, so there are a lot of candidates here, right? It's always frustrating for Dodgers fans when they have an incredible roster and they spend huge sums of money, they win a ton of games, and then they don't do anything in the playoffs. But at the same time, it's hard to win in Major League Baseball playoffs. You've had a lot of good teams. The Atlanta Braves win. It seemed like every year when they had their big 3 pitchers, they're making the playoffs and losing their. Baseball's just different. And they still won over 100 games. The Lakers, I don't know that the expectations were that high. I don't think anybody really thought the Lakers were going to win a title. It's funny, Mark mentions LeBron and everything he touches turns to crap. I mean, he's a top 3 player of all time. So I don't know that we can say that, but it does tell you something about how Laker fans view LeBron, right? I mean, Kareem was moody and Kobe was selfish and Shaq was lazy, and I loved every single one of those guys. I just find it difficult to like LeBron James, and I don't know. Maybe that's because as a Laker fan, I had to hate him for all those years before he came over, and I just couldn't switch the mindset. But I don't know. There was something about him, but nobody thought they were going to win. Men's basketball, that was a pretty disastrous season for a team that had expectations. But the only reason that pick doesn't win is because fundamentally at USC, nobody cares that much. Were we disappointed? We were disappointed. But were we disappointed to the same level that we were when USC loses 5 of their last 6 regular season games in football, and the lone win is a really horrific looking, 50-49 game against Cal? No, that was worse. We all know it was worse. And so while it was a layup, Eric does get the point for choosing the right USC squad. He's up 2-1. Number 3, straying from football a little bit, the way we often do. What's in worse shape artistically at the moment? The big movie studios or the big record labels? Who's doing a worse job of putting out content? The movie companies or the music companies? What do you think? Mark, start us off.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the music labels. Look, the movie industry, they can always gin up an old movie, redo it, throw it out there, and people are going to go see it. You always have the Marvel Avenger movie type of movies that people are going to flock to go and see. Music, I don't know, man. With AI taking over, you never know who you're listening to anymore. You don't even know if it's real. To me, I don't care about either one of those industries, but if I had to pick one, I think the record industry is probably suffering more.
Eric?
So worst shape artistically, Mark just said why it's the movie studio, because the answer to everything is, hey, we already made this movie and people saw it. Let's just make it again. Yesterday I saw another like Lion King reboot that's coming out. So yeah, artistically it's that. And if you want to talk AI for music, CGI did that for movies forever ago, where you have one guy in a room now and he stands there and it's all, you green screen, blue screen, whatever it is around him, and we'll make a movie. So that's it for me, right? If it's not something that's just an old Disney movie, it's a Marvel thing now, and that's 90%, it seems like, of the movies coming out right now. And so it's hard to even see that there's a new movie come out and spend any amount of time trying to dig into it, because it's that you've seen it before.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one for me, because it seems to me that both end. It doesn't seem like there's an artist that's involved in producing anything in either industry at this point. There's no creativity. They're following a formula, and the formula is tired. Golden age of television. Television's great, but movies and music are disaster. So I don't know, man. I think that both answers are decent. Neither one stood out head and shoulders above the other. They're both right, because both industries are a mess. It's 3-2. Eric McKinney going into
Look, Chris, I don't want to knock you here. That feels soft. Like when neither answer doesn't work, I assume based on your history, we both lose a point. I mean, again, I know it's dangerous to suggest that, but I don't want the crap, right? I speak for the audience too, and I don't want them to start talking about, hey, Chris is losing his edge a little bit.
All right. First of all, you don't speak for the audience. I speak for the audience. You just lost a point.
That's
it's
right.
Now 2-2.
Oh my gosh, I forgot that.
But listen. This is. I thought both of your answers were decent, though. I mean, I don't want to set expectations too high for you guys. I'm not expecting spectacular from you. I just want passable, and you both gave passable. All right, it's 2-2.
Thank God, because there's more questions.
Yeah, it's 2-2 going into question 4. Best movie villains: the Cold War Russians or Nazis? Eric starts off.
I'm gonna go Nazis on this. The range that you have, right? You go. I mean, the Indiana Jones ones, right? Those stand out, but you can go the Rocketeer, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and that you can run the gamut on those. Inglourious Bastards is there. You can show, right? You just scan down the shoulder and you see the badge, and that's it. That set the tone for your entire movie. And so I think that they are the gold standard in movie villains.
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. Look, here's the whole thing about the Cold War Russians. They were cold. You knew that they weren't going to ever push that button. They were always there to threaten you. But with the Nazis, you knew what they were doing. You knew what their intent was. And the world we're living in today, this one's a little personal for me. So, yeah, Nazis, worst villain ever. Period.
Here's my concern about this, though, because there are some exceptions.
You're concerned about the Nazis?
I'm concerned about the Nazis.
There's people on both sides, Chris. Is that where you're going with this?
Here's the thing. Well, let's not understate the evil of the Soviet Union. That's gonna irritate me if we do. But here's the thing: the Nazis tend to be cartoonish in the movies. Other than Inglourious Bastards, right? The Christoph Waltz's character in that was fantastic, right? He was polite, he was smart, he was clever, and he was evil. But the evil was usually under the surface. That's fantastic. The Nazis tend to be so cartoonish, though, and the Cold War Russians. When you don't have the James Bond series without the Cold War Russians, and I actually remember the Cold War. Like the Nazis were gone long before I was alive, but I remember the '80s. And there was nothing like that rivalry in the '80s. And I don't know. There's no Nazi Ivan Drago. So I actually think this is closer than you guys think it is. And I'm a little bit disappointed in both of you for acting like it's obvious. Nobody gets.
You love when we hedge too. I mean, that's another thing that I've learned.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's still 2-2 after 4 questions. All right. college football's Final Four next year. Who's it going to be, Mark?
The one question I didn't even think about.
Okay, then don't answer it. We'll just give you a 0.
I gotta give an answer. We'll see if
All
it wins. I'm gonna go Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, and God forgive me, Oregon.
All right, Eric, do you have an answer that's better than that one? I bet you do.
So that's rough because I said the same 4, but Mark gave a real answer. I only included Oregon as the absolute ultimate reverse jinx to include them and talk them up in a big way this offseason so that the disappointment could be more enjoyable when they don't make it. But I mean, that's chalk, right? That's chalk at this point. Still don't know a lot about what these teams are going to look like. So going with anyone else is kind of just guessing.
At least
you could go with Alabama, right? I mean, they're loaded with talent. DeBoer's a solid coach. You could see Alabama getting in there. I don't know how good Oregon's really going to be, but maybe that's just because I hate them so much. But and I think Alabama will slip. They're not gonna remain at the Nick Saban level because that was as good as anybody's ever been. But they probably won't slip a ton with DeBoer, I don't think. All right, both of you lose a point because you picked Oregon.
Georgia, Texas, Alabama is 3 SEC teams that you're talking about too in the Final Four.
Yeah, well,
if Georgia, Texas.
Yeah, but 8 of the 12 teams are going to be from the SEC. Okay, whatever. 1-1. Number 6. The most hopeless USC season ever. The season where just on a weekly basis, you just wanted college football to be swallowed up by the earth so you didn't have to look at it or think about it. Here are your choices. Larry Smith's last season, Paul Hackett's last season, or Clay Helton's last season. Mark, start us off.
It was Paul Hackett's last season because you knew that it wasn't going to get better. And you're saying to yourself, you know what? There's not another coach out there worse than Paul Hackett.
It's true. That's a true statement, by the way.
Who knew that things could actually get worse down the line? So for me, it was definitely Paul Hackett. That I still remember sitting in the end zone, in the peristyle end, and only because that's where my ticket was. I eventually moved closer.
Well, that is where you're supposed to sit, Mark.
Right. Well, against Arizona.
Mark sits where his ticket is. That's interesting. Go ahead.
That loss that USC happened, that they came against Arizona in the Coliseum. Yeah, that year with Paul Hackett, I was just like, you know what? This sucks.
I look at that Cal home loss with the whole, are we going to put the punt return unit in? We can put the defense unit. Let's waste our last time out. Didn't get a penalty. I mean, it was that whole series just perfectly encapsulated what it's like to have Paul Hackett leading your program. But no, I'm not going to say it yet because Eric needs to answer. Eric, what do you think? Which one are you going with?
But they beat UCLA that year.
Yeah,
which
that's right.
Doesn't change everything because you don't, right, at USC you don't measure seasons. Oh, that was a successful year because they beat UCLA. But it does change this question when you're talking about these 3 specific seasons. So that's the one, and I know the Hackett haters are absolutely with Mark, and I don't blame them for doing that. Larry Smith ending with losing to UCLA, Notre Dame, and then Fresno State is really, really rough. That 2001 season, when Helton got let go, there was this burst of, right, finally, it's all positive, but you still had to play out the year. And when it was obvious very quickly that Dante Williams was not a head coach and that this wasn't going to get worked out, that season dragged on forever. And the caveat to that is that Lincoln Riley was hired before the end of the year, so you did get kind of a boost at the end. But talking about that specific season, if I told you UCLA scored 75 points against USC in the Coliseum, would you be able to tell me how many they actually scored? I mean, that was the end of that year.
Yeah.
62 points to UCLA, getting like booed out of the stadium by BYU fans somehow in your last home game, and then taking 25 guys up to Cal to lose that season dragged out forever. That one was brutal. Lost it to UCLA and Notre Dame in that one.
Paul Hackett.
Well, okay, so here's the way I analyze this. Paul Hackett was the worst coach in USC football history. Clay Helton was unbelievably horrific. Paul Hackett was worse. Okay, he was the worst coach that I've ever seen in any sport at any level. I've seen, when you're watching a little league game and there's some dad who's coaching the team and he never played ball and he has no idea what he's doing and it's just an absolute disaster. That's better than Paul Hackett. Here's the thing, though. They did beat UCLA. I continued to watch every second of every game. And there was never any question in my mind that year that Paul Hackett was going to be fired and that they were going to try to go out and make the program better. The reason that last Clay Helton season was so bad, first of all, I mean, on the field, I've never seen it worse, right? You wouldn't think that getting rid of Clay Helton would make things worse, but it actually, like, the bottom fell out. It went from we're horrible and I hate this to I've never seen anything like this. And two, by the end of the year, I don't even want to watch it anymore. I'm going to turn the game on. I'm going to watch the first half because the game is going to be on at like midnight or whenever they start games when USC is the worst team in the country. It was hard for me in Central Time to even stay up anyway. And I didn't care. I didn't even feel guilty. I'd go to sleep and I'd say, yeah, I'm going to write an article about this game tomorrow. Maybe I'll just tell people I only watched the first half. And I had very real doubts about whether USC was committed to going out and making the football program better. And so I think that was the worst year. Larry Smith's last year was bad, but they actually played a little bit better as last year. They did the year before that when they went 3-8 and lost to Memphis at home. Okay, I shouldn't even bring up topics like this, but I do it because I live in a glass half empty world. McKinney, you win that. It's 2-1. You got back one of the points you lost. All right, here's a good question. Clay Matthews, Ray Maualuga, or Brian Cushing? Pick one. Mark.
Brian Cushing. And I'm going to tell you why. Look, Ray, great linebacker. Clay Matthews, excellent linebacker. Probably better in the pro level than he was at USC. Brian Cushing, he doesn't have everything going on upstairs. He's a little bit of a psycho. He was USC's version of Vontaze Burfict, just not quite as violent or psycho. I want that guy on defense with that type of mentality. Somebody who's, you know what? I'm going to knock you over. I'm going to tell you, I knocked you over. What are you going to do about it? That's who Brian Cushing was.
You might be understating Ray's mindset, but okay. I like the answer and the explanation. Eric, what do you think? Who's your choice?
Yeah, look, they're all good. Cushing was a close third actually for this. Ray made so many big plays in big games, it felt like. But I'm gonna go with Clay Matthews. I need someone to get after the quarterback. I think that changes games as much as anything. And again, because there's no explanation on this, I'm taking pro career into this too. So I'm taking Clay Matthews, everything that he did on the football field.
It's interesting. We're all going to pick a different guy here. I'm going to go with Ray, and I actually think you can make a strong argument that Matthews and Cushing were better football players than Ray was, although Ray was incredible. But I think it's just easier to find an edge guy that's great than it is to find a guy in the middle who is a physical force in the inside running game and can run sideline to sideline that Ray could. That is a really unusual thing to find. And so if I had to choose, like if I could pick one guy for this year's team, it would easily be Ray, because putting him in the middle changes everything. Whereas Matthews and Cushing they'd be USC's best defensive player and they'd be incredible. But I think we can find edge guys. So I go Ray for that reason, but all good answers. And because
you can give yourself a point. You convince me.
Okay, I'm not going to give myself a point.
Cushing in the middle.
What's that?
I'm not convinced you couldn't put Cushing in the middle. The only reason they played him on the outside is because you had Ray there in the middle.
I mean,
Because he wasn't better than Ray in the middle.
I didn't say that.
I mean, maybe that's right. Look, I'm going to take Eric's advice. I'm going to give myself a point. That was smart by Eric, because I was going to give the point to Mark, not necessarily because his answer was better, but because he had the courage publicly to talk about Brian Cushing not being all there mentally, which strikes me as a very dangerous thing for a guy who goes to all of USC's home games to say. And that's Brett. You know what? I'm still getting him the point. We'll both get a point. Eric's the only one that doesn't get a point that round. And may God bless Mark Culkin and keep him safe. Question number 8 in this 2-2 tie. Same kind of question. Robert Woods, Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Dwayne Jarrett? Pick one. Mark, start us off.
4th and 9. I got Dwayne Jarrett. Those other guys are great. All you have to do is say 4th and 9, and you know exactly what everybody's talking about.
Yeah. Eric?
I mean, I hate that. I hate that. Yeah. Right. That, I mean, word for word is what I was going to say. In today's game, maybe you want the slot guy. Dwayne Jarrett's always going to be, until we get Mike Williams and Keyshawn in the discussion also, Dwayne Jarrett's going to be that guy.
Yeah. Minus 1 point to me for asking a question that was just too easy. The answer is 4th and 9. Woods and St. Brown were amazing. And maybe they were even better players than Jarrett, although, I don't know. But you're right. Jarrett had a moment that those other two guys never had, and it was maybe the greatest moment in USC football history. So the answer is Dwayne Jarrett. It's still 2-2, and I lost the only point I had, so it's 2-2.
Jarrett, just as more of a shout out to him, if you look at like the career leaders, I mean, Jarrett's 3 all-time in receiving yards for USC. He's one in touchdowns. Like, he doesn't get, I don't think he gets talked about enough in terms of some of USC's best receivers.
I think that's right. And I'll tell you the reason I don't think he does, because he followed Mike Williams. And while Jarrett had better overall numbers than Williams also had he didn't have, I mean, he gave up his junior year. And if anybody who watched the two of them play within a year or two of each other like we did, Mike Williams was better. That's not a slight to Dwayne Jarrett, who is an amazing football player and had one of the greatest moments in college football history. It's just Mike Williams. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this again. Last week I went off talking about how great Mike Williams was. Everybody got mad at me. When Mike Williams and Reggie Bush were on the field together, Mike Williams was better. I'm not saying that he was a better football player over the course of a career than Reggie, but when they were both on the same team, he was better. Reggie was a freshman, but Mike was only a sophomore. Okay, question number 9, and it's still 2-2. This one, you know what? This is a 3-point question because there's a lot of pressure here. If you had to be traded as a fan to another college football program, which one would you choose? Eric.
Can I ask for, this is forever or this is for a year?
Oh, it's forever, man.
That's tough. All right. Right, for my friends and family, it's Northwestern, but I'm not going to answer that because nobody is going to pick that. I'm gonna say Virginia Tech, because we're not going head to head with USC almost ever, so I don't have to root against USC. Mark's going to pick one where he has to root against USC. Just wait. You get right, Enter Sandman, and I don't mind going to a team where there's not the disappointment if you don't win a national championship, right? It's kind of a fun place to be. You go for the game and you lose some of that, you have to win or else this was an absolute waste of a day. But I think the atmosphere is kind of a big part of it, seeing another part of the country. And yeah, there's part of like not being in the Big Ten with USC and not going to an SEC program.
That's a really good and interesting answer. I didn't expect Virginia Tech. The other thing that you could have pointed out, though, is that they will be playing
I was just about to point this out, but go ahead and say it.
They will be playing Stanford, which means you can root for close losses to Stanford, which is Mark's favorite thing.
God, could you imagine the disappointment in rooting for a close loss to Stanford and beating them by like 15 or 16? It's devastating.
Terrible. It'd be terrible. Mark will never live that down, and I will never let anyone forget he said that. Mark, what is your answer? Is it going to be somebody the USC plays so that Eric can say, I told you so?
So I was going to say Stanford, but I changed my mind at the last second. I'm actually picking Ole Miss. And I know USC has a couple of games lined up against those guys coming up. However, if I can't be a fan of USC, I'm going to go hang out in the Grove. I'm going to drink hottie toddies all day long. I'm going to stare at some really nice scenery, and I'm going to enjoy myself. So if I can't be a USC fan, I'm going to get drunk as hell. And I'm going to hang out with Lane Kiffin and become an Ole Miss fan.
And you're going to wear a T-shirt with a Confederate flag on it, Mark?
Are they still doing that over there?
I think so, aren't they? I don't know. I haven't seen.
I'll put on the wife beater.
Okay, both are solid answers. Here's what I think makes the most sense. It has to be a program that is not a USC competitor, right? If somebody would have said Ohio State, I would have been furious. That's unacceptable. But it also has to be a program that's good enough that it will occasionally be a threat to those other programs. I would have gone Michigan State, and I understand that that's going to be a conference foe, and I'd have to recuse myself one game out of the year, I suppose. But Michigan State, they're always playing. They have a rivalry with Michigan, where if they lose, it's like everybody expects them to lose, but if they win, it's glorious. Every once in a while they'll take down Ohio State or Penn State. That's a team that I could root for. While they're good enough that sometimes they can do something, but the expectations aren't that high. Maybe Magic Johnson will show up to a game. I don't know. I could see that, and I think you got a similar thing going with Ole Miss, other than the Confederate flag everywhere. And I just don't know if I can get over that. So because of that, I'm actually going to divide up the 3 points because I do whatever I want. I'm going to give 2 of those points to Eric because he chose a team that doesn't have a Confederate flag. I'm going to give 1 to Mark Hulkin because he chose a team that will every once in a while compete against Alabama or somebody like that. And every time one of those big names SEC teams lose, it makes me very happy. So the score going into the last question is McKinney 4, Mark Hulkin 3. Don't do the eye roll. I will take a point away so fast. All right.
Well, I gotta tell you, Mark, Ole Miss was in there for me. Had it been 1 year, I would have thought about like being able to root for this Lane Kiffin compared to the Lane Kiffin we got would be kind of a fun year, right? Jackson Dart's down there, and like you mentioned, just kind of getting a year of that would have been fun.
You know, you're
not forever because Lincoln Riley's not going to be there forever.
And you're going to get
Lane Kiffin.
You're going to get a great soundbite out of Kiffin at least once a year.
Yeah, no, look, this Lane Kiffin is fantastic. He still pokes fun at people, but he seems to be a little more grown up. He's actually prepared to be a head coach, and I think he's a pretty good one. The upside to being Monty Kiffin's kid is that you get all kinds of opportunities. The downside is you get those opportunities before you're ready. Kiffin is a legitimately solid head coach now in a way that he just wasn't when he was too immature to have that job. They'd be a fun team to root for. I hope they play well this year because if they play well, they're knocking off a bunch of teams in the South that I hate. Okay, 4-3, last question. This question's worth whatever I want it to be worth. And it's not even a particularly good question. The question is Adele or Whitney Houston? Who do you got, Eric McKinney?
First of all, I think it's a great question. I mean, don't sell yourself short.
Don't contradict me. That doesn't help you. Go ahead.
So again, because I know what I know you love most deep down is when we hedge and when we redo the question for you. I know that's it's unspoken. It's been unspoken. I'm putting it out there spoken.
It's your way of showing me that my question wasn't very good and could have been a lot better. So I do appreciate it. Go ahead and do it.
It is. So here's how I'm going to answer this, and then Mark can sort it out. I think I will take Adele's full catalog But if I have to see something live and it's like a one-time performance, I'm gonna go to the Whitney Houston show.
Okay, so Eric didn't answer the question. Mark, do you want to answer the question?
I answered my question.
Whitney Houston. I'm not going to oversell it. It's Whitney Houston.
It's a clear, I don't even know if it's the right answer, but he did give an answer. And because he gave an answer, then, I mean, with everything on the line, McKinney doesn't even answer the question. Mark, what do you think about that? What do you think about the fact that everything is on the line and Eric chooses not to actually give it a definitive answer?
Because Eric doesn't really know who Whitney Houston is or Adele. I don't think he can name a song by Adele if he doesn't have Google in front of him.
Well, wait, if he names a song by Adele, he wins the game. Go ahead, Eric.
Google right in front of him, though. He has to turn around.
Rolling in the Deep. I know an Adele song.
Rolling in the Deep. The winner of this game.
That song played every second of 5 years of all of our lives.
If you had it on the radio right now, I could not tell you it was Adele. I know when Whitney
that was some projection from Mark. I don't know if Mark knows an Adele song.
Whitney Houston is on the radio.
All
I
right.
have no idea if Adele.
Here's the thing I love about this last question. It wasn't a good question, but it made for a great game. And here's why it made for a great game. Because first, Eric McKinney tries to throw the game away. Does his best. He literally tells me, I'm going to do something you hate, which is change your question and not answer even the one I'm changing it to. That's ridiculous, right? And then Mark comes and finds a way to reach his hand into the fire and pull defeat out of there by making this crazy bold claim that Eric can't even name an Adele song. Of course he can. And what I love best is all of the Mark Culkin cheerleaders who watch this show who get angry with me every time they think I cheat Mark. They're going to go completely nuts that I give Mark the loss after Eric refused to answer the question and Mark had it wrapped up. But that's what's going to happen.
Chris, I feel like a winner just knowing that I have cheerleaders out there.
Well, you may feel like a winner, Mark, but today you're not one. Today, Eric is. Congratulations, Eric. Guys, other than comments about Adele's discography, is there anything you want to say to the people before we sign off?
No, I was just going to list another Adele song just to prove that it wasn't a fluke. But now that we're not allowed to do that, I'm not even going to try.
Good call, Mark.
No, I'm just going to go hang out with my Whitney Houston music. Enjoy it.
Thank God he said music, right? It's very concerning.
I'm not sure Whitney would be.
I was going to go somewhere else.
Now.
I was going to go somewhere else with it, but I don't want to end up like Whitney Houston, so I'll just enjoy your music.
Oh, okay. Well, all of us will end up like Whitney Houston at some point, just without the art left behind, Mark. And I'm pretty sure that you're not going to leave behind anything that people listen to. Okay, that's all we have for today. Thanks for joining us. And if this turned into a complete disaster at the end, that's what you're signing up for when you watch this show anyway, and you all know it. All right, until next week, fight on, everybody.